charged with 2 felony warrants for murder.
Yeah, I was like, okay.
Actually, I really did it.
This is 17-year-old Cassandra Borg. Right now, she is sitting inside an interrogation room, about to face detectives who suspect her of something unthinkable, the violent murder of both of her grandparents. At first glance, Cassandra doesn't look like a killer. She laughs, cracks jokes, talks about school, even about her hobbies like swimming and softball. The detectives play along, buying her food, sipping drinks with her, and chatting casually as if they were old friends. But behind this calm and almost playful exterior lies something far darker. Only a year earlier, Cassandra's grandparents, Randall and Wendy Borg, had taken her in. They hoped to guide her onto a better path after years of troubling behavior. But instead of improving, Cassandra spiraled further out of control. Police were called to their home more than 30 times in just 12 months. She repeatedly ran away, fought with her grandmother, and showed violent outbursts. And soon, Cassandra would meet someone who would fuel her darkest desires, 19-year-old Johnny Ryder. Together, they began planning the unthinkable, the murder of the very people who had tried to save her. The detectives in the room, still unaware of the full truth, keep Cassandra comfortable. They laugh at her jokes, listen as she shares her thoughts, and carefully build trust. But once the conversation shifts back to why she's really there, the atmosphere begins to change. Cassandra remembered the first time she truly felt close to Johnny. She had been dating him for only 3 months, but to her, it felt deeper than just a teenage romance. One night, while they were in Atlanta, they found themselves sitting on top of a parking garage, staring out at the glittering city lights. In that moment, Johnny turned to her and said that when he looked into her eyes, all he could see was her, surrounded by a purple glow. To him, purple was a sign of love. Cassandra believed him. She believed it was love at first sight. But the truth was far darker. Johnny had already been married to another woman, someone Cassandra would later describe as crazy, someone who accused her of stalking, even though they had barely crossed paths. Despite the chaos, Cassandra's attachment to Johnny only grew stronger. She admitted to investigators that she cared about him deeply, even after everything fell apart. When police eventually closed in on Cassandra and Johnny, the pair made a desperate decision. Rather than face a lifetime behind bars, they attempted to end their own lives as the SWAT team stormed the building. Officers found them bleeding, barely clinging to life. Both were rushed to the hospital. After countless stitches and casts, Cassandra survived, and within days, she was discharged and taken straight into police custody. She would later explain that the chain of events had begun long before that night. It started when her grandmother kicked her out, after yet another explosive argument at home. Cassandra insisted she hadn't run away. She had simply been forced out. And with nowhere else to go, she drifted further into Johnny's world, a world that would soon spiral into violence, desperation, and tragedy. She remembered feeling like she didn't belong anywhere. Her home wasn't a safe place. It was a battlefield. Arguments with her mum would end with her being shoved out the door, her belongings thrown at her feet, and the police being called on her. So when her grandparents tried to take her in, it wasn't really a homecoming. It was just another place where she felt unwanted. The fight started almost immediately. Small disagreements turned into screaming matches. She had even caught charges for fighting with them, charges that left scars on their bodies and on her record. The bond she once had with her grandparents was gone. They no longer looked at her the same way. The warmth in their eyes had turned cold, distant, unsure. They didn't know how to talk to her anymore, and she didn't know how to talk to them. What used to feel like love and trust had now become silence and suspicion. That's when Johnny entered the picture. He wasn't just a friend, he was an escape. They slept in his car, drifted from place to place, trying to fill their days with anything that distracted them from reality. One night at the park, their conversation took a darker turn. Johnny looked at her and asked a chilling question. "Are you afraid to die?" She said no. Then she asked him the same, and he said no too. What followed wasn't a plan of escape. It was a plan for destruction. He asked her if she would ever consider killing her grandparents. For a moment, she froze. The thought was unthinkable. But then, she thought about the fights, the bruises, the cold stares, and how much she longed to be free. And instead of saying no, she hesitated. That hesitation would change everything. Cassandra sat across from detectives, her voice calm, but her words chilling. She described how everything began, not in a moment of rage, but in quiet planning. She spoke of nights spent in the park with Johnny, talking not about love or dreams, but about murder. Johnny, she claimed, had worries of his own: probation, warrants, and the fear of police. But Cassandra's mind was already racing ahead. She knew her grandmother's habits, the exact hour she drifted to sleep, the layout of the backyard, even the tiny gate hidden by the trees. She had a set of keys, and in her mind, the house was already wide open. They would wait until midnight, slide through the shadows, and slip inside unnoticed. Detectives leaned in as Cassandra explained how she even moved a heavy cement block to help Johnny climb through, making it sound disturbingly casual, as though she had rehearsed this in her head countless times. When they finally reached the back deck, Cassandra noticed a light still on inside. Her grandmother wasn't asleep yet. So they waited, hiding near the shed, watching the house like predators circling their prey. When the lights finally went out, Cassandra pulled out her keys. She knew which door to use, which alarm sensor to avoid. The way she described it, entering the house wasn't forced, it wasn't chaotic. It was smooth, practiced, and terrifyingly calculated. Cassandra explained how she had disabled the alarm system long before that night. It wasn't complicated, just a small button to push, and the battery came out. She admitted she had done it partly so she could sneak out whenever she wanted, and partly because she hated the constant beeping. That small decision meant the house was defenseless the night she and Johnny returned. When they reached the back door, Cassandra was the first to slip inside. Her grandmother often barricaded that entrance with furniture, but Cassandra knew exactly how to maneuver around it. Carefully, she eased the door open, shifting the items just enough to make space without causing a sound. Once she was through, she quietly moved the rest of the obstruction, allowing Johnny to follow. They closed the door behind them and locked it, sealing themselves inside. At first, they lingered near the stairs, listening. The house was silent. Too silent. Once convinced that her grandmother was asleep, they began to creep upstairs. Cassandra carried the weapon herself, a tire iron taken from Johnny's car. Johnny brought only his fists, though he carried a black backpack filled with duct tape, gloves, and the very same tire iron Cassandra now gripped tightly in her hand. The gloves were disposable, hospital style, thin, blue, and meant to keep their fingerprints hidden. Each step up the staircase was deliberate, the silence in the house amplifying every sound. Cassandra's grip tightened around the cold metal in her hand as the two of them crept upward, preparing for what was about to unfold. He crept up the stairs first, his footsteps heavy with anticipation, while Johnny followed close behind. Without hesitation, Johnny slipped into the grandfather's room, and he turned toward the grandmother's. Almost immediately, the sound of chaos broke out across the hall. Shouts, the muffled sounds of a struggle, the grandfather fighting back with everything he had. That's when the rush hit him. Adrenaline coursed through his body as he raised his hand and struck his grandmother across the back of the head. She screamed, clawing and fighting, even sinking her teeth into his finger in a desperate attempt to defend herself. He remembered the pain vividly. Not the first time she had bitten him, but this time it felt different. More vicious, more final. She bit his hand and even left a deep mark on his arm. Fueled by anger, he grabbed the duct tape he had brought and began restraining her. Her wrists were yanked behind her back, her ankles bound tightly, and finally her face was wrapped so roughly that her muffled pleas barely escaped. Johnny soon entered the room again, his presence adding to the nightmare. He helped finish tying her down, then returned to the grandfather's room, leaving him alone with his terrified grandmother. But the plan was far from over. He dragged her into the other bedroom, where Johnny was still struggling to keep control. At Johnny's demand, he went downstairs and fetched 3 large butcher knives. When he returned, he demanded the code to the safe he knew was hidden in the closet. Terrified and helpless, the grandmother finally gave it up, offering money, keys, anything to save her life. Inside the safe, he stuffed a backpack with envelopes of cash, nearly $1,000, not realizing yet just how much darker the night was about to become. Cassandra had hinted at something strange before the crime even happened. She had nervously joked, "What if I just gave you $1,000? Would that make the world a better place?" At the time, it sounded bizarre, almost absurd. But when the moment came, she really did have that money with her. Shockingly, it wasn't just talk. The cash was real, and she stuffed it into a bag as if preparing for something far darker. Meanwhile, Johnny was inside the grandparents' room. Cassandra walked back in and told him she had the money. What happened next was a twisted turn no one could have imagined. They dragged her grandmother into the bathroom, not because they had to, but simply because they didn't want her in the bedroom. It was chillingly casual, almost as if they were rearranging furniture. Once inside, terror consumed the elderly woman. She was so frightened that she lost control of her body, crying, trembling, and ultimately soiling herself. To Cassandra, it was disturbing, but to Johnny, it was a moment of power. Then came the final blow, a brutal strike with a tire iron. The sound of that hit was the end of her grandmother's life, carried out without hesitation. Afterward, they closed the doors, checked the house as if nothing had happened, and Cassandra began stuffing her clothes into bags. Johnny paced, making sure both grandparents were dead, checking every detail with cold precision. And then they left, not to escape, not to hide, but to eat. They drove to a nearby grocery store, bought food, and returned to the house where 2 lifeless bodies lay only a few feet away. For days, Cassandra continued going to karate lessons, while Johnny hung out with friends. They shopped, dined, and carried on with their teenage routines, all while the corpses of her grandparents decomposed under the same roof. When friends asked about her grandparents, Cassandra casually claimed they were away on vacation. But this wasn't the end. Cassandra and Johnny weren't just done with her family. They were plotting the next step. The horrifying plan was to kill Johnny's family as well. They had convinced themselves that once both families were gone, they would finally be free to run away together. But as the days passed, the plan began to fall apart. Their attempt to kill Johnny's sister and her boyfriend failed miserably, and the perfect escape unraveled into chaos. What started as a fantasy of money, freedom, and escape quickly devolved into a nightmare of blood, fear, and failure. The murders of Cassandra's grandparents were not the end. In fact, they were only the beginning of a far more chilling plan. The next step, according to Cassandra, was to kill Johnny's family and collect even more money. But unlike a carefully timed operation, their plan wasn't set in stone. It wasn't, "Saturday at 5:55 we strike." It was more reckless, more impulsive. A day-to-day fantasy that spiraled further out of control. Johnny's family was small, just his mother and his 2 sisters. That was it. But for Cassandra and Johnny, that was enough. Their vision was to wipe out everyone close to them, and then vanish into a new life together. To prepare, they had armed themselves with terrifying tools. From bear spray, purchased at a Bass Pro Shop, to a baseball bat and butcher knives. The plan was simple. When Johnny's family came home one by one, they would be ambushed. Cassandra recalled how the bear spray burned when it accidentally hit her own skin. "It was crazy," she admitted. "Like fire. Your eyes, your body. It burned so bad." And yet, they used it anyway. Johnny sprayed it directly into the face of his sister and her boyfriend. Cassandra tried too, but her can malfunctioned. Chaos exploded inside the house, shouts, pain, panic, and the plan unraveled right there. Instead of a calculated execution, it became a mess of burning spray and fear. The idea to slaughter Johnny's family, Cassandra claimed, wasn't hers. It was Johnny's. He was the one who romanticized the idea of them being Bonnie and Clyde. He even said the words out loud. "Let's be Bonnie and Clyde." Cassandra, already unstable, agreed. She admitted later that she didn't think Johnny's family deserved to die, but the thought of being free from her own family's control made her go along with it. Her anger, however, was most deeply rooted in her grandmother. "I couldn't handle her anymore," Cassandra said. "She called the cops on me for no reason. She insulted my mom. She pushed me past the breaking point." Still, she admitted her grandmother didn't deserve what happened. It wasn't justice, it was desperation. And Cassandra's rage didn't stop there. When asked if her mother had ever been part of the plan, Cassandra chillingly confessed, "I wanted to. We even discussed it, but Johnny told me no. We can't waste our time on them." But when detectives asked about her life and the choices she had made, Cassandra's answers began to reveal something darker. She admitted that the main reason behind what she did, the unthinkable act of killing her own grandparents, wasn't rage alone. It was desperation. She just wanted to get away from her family. In her mind, ending their lives would finally free her. She described the moment of the attack with chilling clarity. While Johnny went after her grandfather, she turned on her grandmother. She said she felt a rush, not a thrill of excitement, but a twisted surge of inevitability. It was go time, she recalled. No turning back. Every emotion, anger, heartbreak, frustration, exploded out of her in that single act. To Cassandra, her grandparents weren't just relatives. They were obstacles. Not because of Johnny, not because of love, but because of probation. She believed that probation had ruined her life. It kept her confined, held her back from the freedom she thought she deserved. She hated the curfews, the restrictions, the constant sense that her future had been stolen. In her mind, her grandparents represented that prison, and so, with a mix of fury and despair, she tried to destroy it. Cassandra admitted that the money they hoped to steal from Johnny's family was supposed to fund their new life. Their plan was simple. After the murders, they would run away to Florida. Maybe Pensacola, maybe Panama City. Somewhere far enough to escape reality, as she put it. Not to kill again, at least in her words, but simply to disappear. But reality had other plans. Detectives confronted Cassandra with evidence that she had thrown parties at her grandparents' house while their bodies were still upstairs, locked away. At first, she denied everything. She insisted no one had been there. But the investigators had already received multiple reports, even videos, that suggested otherwise. When pressed, Cassandra finally admitted that at least two people, her friend Sunshine and Sunshine's boyfriend Alex, had come over after the murders. According to her, it was just one night. They smoked weed, hung out, and left a few hours later. Cassandra swore they never went upstairs, and that they believed her lie, that her grandparents had gone on vacation. Still, detectives weren't convinced. Rumors had already spread about a foul odor inside the house, and even that Johnny had brushed it off as a sewage problem. Cassandra denied it, but her story kept shifting. And one detail, in particular, stood out. She admitted that she and Johnny poured bleach on her grandparents' bodies. Not immediately, but days later. Cassandra claimed Johnny told her to do it, to control the smell before anyone came over. She said she grabbed a spray bottle, first bleaching her grandfather, then her grandmother, before leaving the bottle behind in the bathroom. The detectives realized what this meant. Cassandra wasn't just a passive accomplice. She was actively trying to cover up the crime. What struck investigators most, though, was how easily she lied. At first, she swore no one had been in the house. Only when confronted with proof did she change her story. And that raised a chilling question. If she could lie so effortlessly about that, what else was she lying about? In the end, prosecutors would determine that Cassandra was not just involved, she was the mastermind. She wasn't driven only by Johnny's influence, but by her own desire to erase her family and start over. If she had her way, there wouldn't have been just 2 bodies. There would have been 7. When the time came for charges, Cassandra was hit with 2 counts of malice murder, one for her grandmother and one for her grandfather. Johnny faced the same. Both would plead guilty to avoid putting their families through the pain of a trial. Their sentence: life in prison with the possibility of parole after 60 years.